Reality. I'm Lauri.Rollings from Lauri.Rollings and Associates.
I'm Nicolle Farup. I am the owner and principal consultant for Good Company HR.
Welcome, everybody. Our guest today is Georgene Huang. She is the co-founder and CEO of Fairygodboss, which is the largest online career community for women. Fairygodboss helps women achieve their career goals by providing community advice, connections, jobs, events, and exclusive company intel from other women. It also works with top employers who care about equity, diversity, and inclusion. Thank you for being here. So, Georgene, can you tell us, how did you come up with the idea for Fairygodboss?
It's a very personal story. I was 2 months pregnant with one of my kids at the time, and I was looking for a job after a management shakeup, and I lost my job unexpectedly. In this moment, I was feeling very self-conscious about my gender, and knowing that I was going to be visibly pregnant in a few months during my interview process really freaked me out, to be completely honest. I thought that would really hurt my chances of getting my next role. And I was using all of these career resources that we all know, LinkedIn, Indeed, Glassdoor, everything I could find online, to help me answer questions I had around what was a company's parental leave policy and how many women were on the management teams of the companies, how diverse, inclusive was the culture, would I be able to thrive there as a young mom? All of these things were going through my mind. And ultimately what that represented to me was a gap in the marketplace and a business opportunity. Yeah. I thought there's 70 million women in the US workforce, and of course, many more around the world. And what this group of women could do if we just got together in numbers and shared the information that we knew about our employers with each other. That was really the beginning.
Yes, I agree. I absolutely agree. Coming from an HR background, I completely appreciate and appreciate where you're coming from with that, and making sure that that information is out there and available, because sometimes it can be really intimidating to go into a job interview and ask about those things. And sometimes, depending on who's interviewing you, they're going to go, ooh, what? Yeah.
Yeah. And from the other perspective, I mean, having interviewed as a woman for executive roles, being very open about the fact that I had a young child, I've had all kinds of illegal and inappropriate questions asked to me in interviews, like, well, who's going to take care of your child? Is all the travel going to be okay with you? You have a young child at home. And, in that moment, it's really hard because you don't want to call them out and say, you can't ask me that. Or have you asked a man with young children that question in the past? So yeah, you're absolutely right. There is a huge gap in the marketplace, or there was. There isn't anymore because you filled it with Fairygodboss. But you're right. I mean, most of the traditional job search platforms don't address those kinds of things. So tell us, how did you come up with the name for Fairygodboss?
Yes, it's a funny name. It's a made-up word. I think at the end of the day, gender equality is a pretty serious, can be heavy topic. And I think I was really thinking to myself, what can bring some levity to the situation, number one? Yeah. And what can connote women helping other women? It really wasn't the idea that there was going to be some fairy godmother that came out of the pumpkin and waved a magic wand and made their career better. It was really just that we have to pay it forward with each other and create our own better outcomes. So we define Fairygodboss as anyone who elevates another woman at work. And it can be a man or a non-binary person.
I like that. That's the image. That's the exact image that I get when I think of that. When I first saw the name Fairygodboss, that was the image I got, was like, oh, okay, yeah, right. So we all get to make the dress for someone, help someone make their dress. Yeah, help someone get to the ball.
Yeah, and another word for it is mentor, right? And women and men can be mentors. Non-binary people can be mentors for women in their career path. So, I mean, I think that's the image it brings up for me too, and I think that's so important. So, can we dive in and maybe you can tell us like a little bit more about the main resources Fairygodboss provides to women seeking career advancement? Because there are a lot of different things at this point.
Yes, when we first launched, I was looking at the job market as a job seeker and thought that job reviews that were out there in the world did not adequately address the questions that I had. So our first product feature really was job reviews for women by women. And we asked women to rate their current or recently former employers on a number of very specific metrics. And I say metrics deliberately. We were interested in numbers. I wanted to know parental leave, number of paid weeks, number of non-paid weeks. I wanted to understand flexibility on a scale of 1 to 5. You can talk about it with all these different words, and words are important, but I wanted sort of a estimate numerically about a number of things, job satisfaction levels, And so there's job reviews. That was our first product feature. And then over time, we saw that women had all sorts of needs that didn't have to do with that job search moment per se. They wanted advice about other things in their career. Maybe they just started a job, but they were having trouble with colleagues or manager or office politics or something much worse. It could be sexual harassment and they didn't know what to do. Nothing to do with rating an employer per se, but it was just like a career situation. And so the next big innovation we launched for women was really this peer-to-peer community feed where conversations can happen. And then finally, we work with employers. They are paying us to list all their jobs on our platform. So if you see an employer on the Fairygodboss platform, they're actively investing with money in trying to reach more women and to recruit them.
Yeah, so I've been looking at, some of the top companies that get the best ratings in terms of being great places to work for women. And I know kind of in the early days of Fairygodboss, there were a lot of tech companies that were being reviewed. But over time, it's kind of expanded to other industries. And I think for 2021, the top rated company is actually a construction company. It's a home remodeling company, which I think is amazing. So I'm just wondering, how do you go about if you're a woman who wants to submit a review of your current employer, your former employer? Can anybody do it? How do you even go about doing it?
Yes. So Fairygodboss is free to leave a review. You have to create an account. An account is what you would imagine it would be. It's like an email. It's a password. And anyone can leave a review of somewhere they've worked. And the best companies list that you refer to, there's nothing pay to play about it. It is organic and based on the reviews only.
I really appreciate what you said about that it's all authentic and that there's no that it's a hard line between people being able to pay for good reviews or being able to influence the good reviews. I think that's so incredibly important. I began my career actually in publishing, and that was something, and in advertising, and that was something that we had to be really super clear about. You can't, just because you're spending a lot of money with us doesn't mean you're going to get great reviews on your company. And so I imagine you have some issues that you have to address with that sometimes. Do you ever have people who are posting jobs and then they have some negative reviews from other people? Have you ever had to navigate that?
Yes, but I will tell you, Nicolle, that it has happened very infrequently. And I think that surprised me a little bit, but in hindsight, I can tell you why I think it doesn't come up as much. Number one, by the time we came into the world, there was already Glassdoor and Yelp and Google reviews. And there's sort of this understanding, particularly in the HR community, that it is taboo to try to influence that. If that got out, that you were buying your way through it, you would just have a big black mark on your forehead, right? So I think the fact that we were not the first to come up with the idea of reviews really helped, number one. And number two, when we surveyed the people who actually left reviews, because you can join our community and not leave a review and just participate in the other things on our platform, but we asked the people who left really good reviews. And by good, I don't mean positive or negative. I just mean really in-depth commentary. They always said that what motivated them was paying it forward and the idea of helping another woman, which I think creates a certain kind of content quality that is different than if you were just leaving a Yelp review. Yes, you're trying to help other diners, but you don't really have any relationship or feeling. I mean, maybe foodies, like really intense foodies are different, but the women who are leaving reviews are really trying to pay it forward. And so even if they're negative, they're trying to explain what it's like in a way that's not just like a rant.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean because, I mean, that's part of the reason I'm doing the work I'm doing right now. I think that all of us are doing the work we're doing right now is that we've had experiences that are unique to us because we are women in professional roles. And it's really important to me personally, and obviously to the two of you, to try and do whatever we can to make the world just a little bit better for other women who are seeking the same kind of challenges. So, can you tell us a little bit about like what was the journey like from getting the idea for Fairygodboss to actually rolling it out?
It's been when you earlier asked me, has it been 15 years? I mean, it can sometimes feel like it's been 15 years. That's my overarching summary of what it was like to roll it out.
That's also my frame of reference. Like, obviously, the last few years have felt like about 15 for me too. So,
but in all seriousness, it was like anything else, taking one step at a time. And it was not the journey that I necessarily imagined in many, many different ways. In the beginning, my co-founder and I don't know how much you want to get into startup operations and storytelling, but in the beginning, my co-founder and I bootstrapped the company, which basically meant that we didn't get paid and we just poured our savings into what I initially conceived as a project. And I thought of it as an ex-finance person. I thought of it as upside downside. My downside was, yes, I was putting a portion of my savings into something that could absolutely turn into zero. Upside, I thought, but actually not just financially, I thought, but at the least there would be a website for women. So I thought, even though I don't want to start a nonprofit, there was a nonprofit good that would be created, even if it didn't work as a business. But on the upside, there could be a very large business and a very large social impact. So that's how I looked at it.
How much, so a lot of laws are changing. I mean, that's where my expertise lies and stuff. And of course, in Oregon State here, we now have pregnancy disability leave laws. You're required to notify people on their very first day of what their rights are, regardless of their gender identity, right? So it doesn't, if you're male, female, or binary or non-binary or whatever, I still have to tell you, hey, if you become pregnant, here's your rights for accommodations. Oregon also has all of these, we have up to 36 weeks of leave for parents. And so, and for pregnant parents. And so, so with that, but not every state is that way, right? We're also seeing kind of a bigger and bigger divide and things like that. But do you see any of the work that you're doing? Have you had a voice in any kind of this legislation, either on a federal or local or state level? Or are you seeing anybody in your community or with, in the Fairygodboss community starting to be more active in making sure that these kinds of laws and these kinds of things, like what we're seeing in Oregon, kind of happen in other places? I mean, obviously, California has always been a leader. New York State, they have a lot of great laws, but is there anything else, that you've been involved with or that Fairygodboss has been involved with to make these things happen?
We, in the early days, became really well known for our parental leave database, which was just a crowdsourced, employer-based, what policy. As a function of having that content on our site, we attracted a lot of people doing research and searching for answers about the confusing mosaic of like employer policy plus the law in their state. And so I think for a time, tried to, even though it's not like our expertise, we tried to basically just provide links back to people, like the Washington State leave page and policy, and try to summarize things best we could. But because we were not focused on policy and politics, we always were treading carefully. Like, we are not legal advice. We can't really advise you what to do. And remember, the data on our site is crowdsourced. We are not like verifying and calling Coca-Cola and saying, is this actually your policy? Because as you know, from being an HR person, the policy is really complicated and it's all about details. It's not just some number.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that's the way in which we played a role. I mean, also, nonprofit organizations found us because they were doing research on best practices. And then sometimes we would, sign open letters, like not ourselves, but like there'd be like, even in this Build Back Better bill, I think that's through Congress, we will put our name on causes that support family leave because we just believe that that's in general what's good for women in the workplace and families and people of all genders.
So, we touched a little bit on the pandemic a moment ago, and that's something I kind of want to hone in on because of the Great Resignation. And, women are obviously a huge piece of that. And I'm just wondering, like, what are your observations on this huge historical moment where so many people are leaving the workforce and a lot of them are women? What do you think is driving that? And do you see any changes in workplace culture that are coming about because of that?
Absolutely. I will take the first question first, which is about women leaving the workplace. I think that we are close to the nadir of I think we're coming up out of it, of a women's labor force participation rate that looks something like 1980s level, which is mind blowing.
Yeah, exactly right.
And I think that is absolutely understandable and predictable to a very large extent, given the support systems we have in this country around caretaking.
Or the lack thereof.
Or the lack thereof. Elder care, child care, those industries not being public and being private. And so when daycares are individual businesses that shut down, it was just like devastating, right? Anybody who had to take care of anybody basically had to choose between taking care of them and working. And that tended to be a lot of women. So that plus the fact that women have, in general, lower paying service-based retail on-site jobs in the hospitality retail industry, that just blew women out of the workforce. It's really sad.
But at the same time, also, as a result of the pandemic and George Floyd's murder, we're also seeing a lot more visible discussion among a lot of different employers about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm wondering if, from your perspective, Georgene, you're actually seeing that translated into measurable results.
I can tell you about what our company's seeing in terms of results in our business, which I think are a direct reflection of what you're talking about. Okay. Our company has grown as a company because DE&I has become table stakes for so many companies. And 5 years ago, it was only the special fancy companies that could afford the social impact. You wouldn't call it investment, PR, marketing. I think now it is very different. And some of that change is, I think, quite likely to stay because there are structural investments that employers are making that are not just flash in the pan investments. They've hired people with titles who had to be given budgets to try to tackle and solve some things around DE&I, right? Once you hire a chief diversity officer and you have 5 diversity recruiters, they have to do something. They don't just get a paycheck. Right. And so all of those people have business objectives, have goals, have results. They have to prove they're doing something. And so that is not going to go away overnight. And part of that I can feel in what our sales team is dealing with when they're talking to employers, right?
That's great to hear, because you hit the nail on the head from my perspective that you can't really achieve measurable results unless you are investing money and resources and accountability and metrics in this sort of thing. You have to treat it like any other business objective. And you can't just kind of have it be a side project for a woman or a person of color who actually their job is something else entirely, and they are expected to just focus on it on the side. So I'm really glad to hear that you're actually observing structural changes to support these efforts.
I've had a lot of discussions about the lack of participation, and there was a statistic about a year ago, and to be honest, I don't know what that statistic is now, but about a year ago, they were theorizing that it was going to take about 9 years to get the workforce participation rate for women back up to the same level it was the week before the pandemic hit. So yeah, it's been a big issue, and it's a lot of why we still continue to have work labor shortages, and so the impact of women not being in the workforce to that degree, it's a big factor in why things are not working very well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I touched on the fact that one of your top rated employers right now is a construction company, because I see this opening up a whole new world for a lot of the women I talk to who are in the construction industry, because I've been interviewing a lot of them over the last several months for this book that I'm writing on how to make construction and specifically the trades more welcoming to women. And it's so difficult for them because a lot of times they're the only woman on a job site, or the only woman working for the company, or even the only woman in their apprenticeship program, and they just don't know who to talk to. And there's no real natural community for them. Like, I will introduce them to each other, and they kind of hear about someone who's also a plumber, but they've never met that person. And so, yeah, I'm excited about the possibility of giving them somewhere to go to talk to each other about the things they're experiencing in the field, on the job site, because I hear the same stories over and over and over again. And a lot of times they think it's only happening to them. And just me telling them, no, I heard the same exact story from somebody who has been in the trade 37 years. And like, she experienced the same thing 37 years ago that you experienced last week. Like, this is happening. So I just think, opening up those kinds of forums for conversations for women to have about the things they experience that are unique to them is really important, regardless of what industry you're working in.
I agree that one of the things that surprised us was how we were like a light bulb, moth to a flame for women who were the only of some kind in their professional life, right? And that actually created a lot of early adopters in people who were double minorities in some way. They were the only woman on their team. They were in a male-dominated field. So we had a lot of those kinds of underrepresented women who didn't have a strong network in real life of people who were similar to them. It's exactly what you said. There actually were many people like them, but they just didn't know them. And so we became a place where those women got together.
Yeah. And that's so important. I mean, because it's so important from a variety of different perspectives. Like, number one, just seeing that there are other people like you. That's really important in terms of your mindset, in terms of, well, maybe I can succeed in this career path I've chosen because she did it. But also having somebody to turn to when you're experiencing things that no one else on your job site is experiencing, from, really simple stuff to like, there's no place for me to go pump milk. I mean, that's something that we've talked about before, Nicolle, in one of our previous episodes. But also, microaggressions, being treated differently, being assigned menial tasks. I think it's really important just for people to be able to talk to each other about it. So I think what you're doing is great.
Something to follow up with what you were talking about, Lauri, is, have you seen, so I saw in my HR community, we are, most of us in my strategic HR network are older women. But what a lot of some conversation that's been going on is about older women in the workforce, and the issues of older women having taken a break because of COVID. I mean, it was hard enough prior to COVID for older women to get back in the workforce, but what kinds of things are you seeing for older women now getting back into the workforce? Is that anything that's a topic of conversation?
Huge topic of conversation in the community. I think less so, quite frankly. I'm seeing that conversation in the employer side of things. But I think the intersection of ageism and sexism is so undercovered. It's not a covered topic. The perception and stereotypes around women as they age are just so different than the perceptions that we have of men as they age in the workforce, from a competency point of view, from a commitment. And there's a group of women, they call themselves, I mean, they're not that old, Gen X women. And the passionate conversation around what it means to be a Gen X woman. You're not millennial and coveted for your social media TikTok skills. You have different priorities and expectations of what good looks like from an employee. You have high standards effectively for what a good employment relationship looks like. You're not going to put up with BS. And you may have reached that middle management point where it's quite difficult to like go up from there, just from a matter of numbers. So there's all kinds of things going on. Then there's elder care and child care. And some people are looking at second act careers in terms of finding more meaningful work. Huge, huge topic of conversation. Very, very many frustrated Gen X and older women.
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing as well. Women are scared. They're scared to get back into the workforce. They're not sure where to find advocacy. Should I just retire? You know, I've had a couple of colleagues who are just like, well, I'm 55. I'm Gen X. I'm 55. Can I retire 10 years early? Or I think I'll stay in my career, even though I hate it and I'm undervalued, for at least a couple more years. I'll kind of hang on and just kind of go through the motions until I can get there, until I can get through. So yeah, it's not hopeful. But it is a conversation that I hope we start having. And I think Fairygodboss is a great venue for that conversation.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's those sort of little incivilities that kind of build up and make things difficult for people and throw up barriers to people progressing along the career ladder. And, that kind of brings up something else I wanted to touch on today, which is the broken career ladder for women in pretty much every industry. But specifically, I mean, McKinsey just released a report focusing on the broken career ladder in technology that has some pretty troubling statistics in it. Only 86 women being promoted to manager for every 100 men. And in technical roles, it's even worse. Only 52 women being promoted to manager for every 100 men. And I'm just wondering, from your perspective, Georgene, in the technology field, do you have any thoughts on what contributes to that phenomenon? And more generally, I'm sure it plays out in pretty much every other industry. What are your thoughts on that?
Technology, I do think, is similar to other male-dominated professions, but is, I think, a very hot topic because our economy is shifting to really becoming a tech-enabled, dependent one. And so it's not just yet another industry like construction or the trades or finance are all, those are just a few that are male dominated. But I think the spotlight is on tech because so much money and power is accruing to those who succeed in technology that it's troubling in particular that women are not more successful there and more represented, because that means that the structural power and wealth imbalance will continue if we don't fix it there. So the why is, one of the topics. And I think the why is important because if you can't answer why it is that way in tech or any other industry, then you can't start to effectively solve for it. And I do think that something is happening in the education system, just to go all the way to the beginning, where the number of graduates in technology and STEM degrees and areas is not where it needs to be. And so if you start off with a pipeline that is so skewed male, then it becomes just that much worse as you progress up the career ladder. And I do think at the entry level, there is a real disparity in software engineers, for example, between men and women. My understanding is that software engineers in the professional realm, not in school, are 20% women and roughly 80% men in the United States. That's just a bunch of statistics that I've seen in different women in tech studies. And most of the employers that we speak to see it glaringly, like they're hiring a lot in technology departments. No matter what kind of company, a retail company that's hiring during the pandemic was not hiring for its stores. They were hiring for their tech department so they could make a better ordering app, right? And they saw that their hires were disproportionately men. They saw that their applicants were disproportionately male. And they turned to Fairygodboss to try to, so I hear this story every day, multiple times a day. Every company is struggling. But those companies can't manufacture a 50-50 software engineering talent pool. They just can't, because that doesn't exist. Right. So when sometimes people talk about pipeline problems as being an excuse, I'm sympathetic with that, but I'm also sympathetic with just like the labor numbers. Like the market is imbalanced. And if you want someone to build something that needs 5 years experience, that is probably most likely a man, and you're urgently trying to fill that role and build your app. It's not something, it's not a short-term thing you can solve. It's a short-term, medium-term, long-term.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you seeing companies maybe develop mentorship and guidance programs for younger women or women who want to get into it so that they can train people, they can provide that education and training?
Yes, and I think some of that happens through nonprofits. Like many times an employer that works in Fairygodboss, which tends to have a more professional managerial level user base, will also partner with, on the total other end of the spectrum, Girls Who Code. You should do both, right? Like you can have internships for girls in college or young women in college, and you should also be working with, as you say, returners. There's return to work programs after women have taken leave, and those tend to be older women. And you kind of have to look at the whole spectrum, not just one point of like recruiting more women out of college.
That is a really, really good point. That I think is a great point to wrap up on. That, this is a complex problem. It's a complex issue with a lot of different inputs, a lot of different variables, and it's going to take a complex solution, attacking the issue from a variety of different perspectives, and a variety of different ways to build the pipeline to begin with, but also to find ways to make every workplace more welcoming for women, through policies, through just creating a respectful workplace. So I think we have our work cut out from us, but I'm really optimistic about the work that Fairygodboss is doing, Georgene, and I just want to thank you for the work you're doing.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a wonderful and amazing resource, and I'm so glad it's out there. So thank you.
So thank you, Georgene, for joining us today. A link to Fairygodboss is going to be in the show notes for this show, so check it out. Whether you're an employee or an employer, there are a lot of great resources for women and for employers who are looking to make their workplaces a better place for women to work and to